Hi, this is Claudia with Angel's Bake Shop. Today I will show you how to make a unicorn cake. First, I start by assembling my layers of cake. Then I add a border at the edge of the layer, or what we call a dam. This helps when you have a softer filling, and it prevents the filling from oozing out of the sides of the cake. I've never noticed how serious I look when I'm cake decorating. Geez, a smile, please. So I do the same process for each layer of the cake, making sure that I apply pressure after each layer so they stick to each other. Now what I'm doing here is just making sure that the cake is straight, and I'm using the extra buttercream from the sides to spread it out. And what I'm doing here, it's called a crumb coating. I am applying a thin layer of buttercream to seal in all the crumbs to make sure that doesn't show up on my finished work. This is what I call the lean. I'm literally bending backwards and checking to make sure that my cake is straight and level. Once the cake has completely chilled, I apply another layer of buttercream using a pastry bag. I also like using my small angle spatula and a bench scraper. When using a bench scraper, make sure that you're holding it at a 90-degree angle so that way the cake is straight. Making sure that your cake is nice and neat takes time, so take your time at this step, filling any gaps that you have with your spatula and also your bench scraper. Again, make sure that it's flush against the cake board and at a 90-degree angle. Once I'm happy how the cake looks, I take my angled spatula and remove the excess from the top, making sure I clean after every swipe. Now let's start working with fondant. I'm going to be using 2 heart cutters in 2 different sizes for the ears, my rolling pin, some cornstarch, and fondant. When I work with fondant, especially when I'm doing something such as ear or horns, something that has to hold its shape, I like to add some tylose powder or CMC powder. This allows the fondant to dry up and stay firm. What I'm doing here is actually called conditioning or kneading the fondant. I'm just making sure that I get it soft enough and pliable enough so I can get a nice and neat result. I start with a long sausage and then I move my hands outward, making sure that I have the same length, and then twist slowly in my hands. Because the fondant is a bit sticky from the warmth of my hands, I don't need to use any glue or anything. Here what I'm doing is just making sure that I'm achieving the shape that I want and both ends are stuck to each other. And I'll just take a paring knife and cut the bottom, the thicker part of the horn, to make sure it's even and it sits nice and flush against the cake once it's dry. Now it's important that you allow your fondant to dry at least a few hours or overnight. Moving on to the ears. Roll out your fondant and use some cornstarch if your hands are getting stuck or it's sticking to the mat. Make sure that you have a nice and neat surface to start with. For this, I will be using the heart-shaped cutters that I showed you earlier. Now I use the bigger one and I cut out 2 ears. What I do next, I take the smaller heart cutter and I make a mark. This will be the inner part of the ears, and then I pinch the bottom part of heart. Right here, I'll be pinching this part and they usually stick to each other. I'm going to form like an insert. This will make things easier once they dry and we're inserting the ears to the buttercream. Now onto the eyes. Roll out your fondant again. For this we're going to be using a 2-inch circle cutter. I'm going to cut out 2 circles, and you're probably wondering why circles, but I'll show you here soon. Now I have my circles here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the same cutter and cut out the edge of the circle, basically like a half moon, a quarter moon, or a super thin moon shaped type of thing, I guess. Here again, I'm going to make sure with my other circle matches the same thickness and size. Okay, to play with them until you're happy you've achieved the same size and length for the eyes. Now, to make the lash part, I'm going to use the same type of cut, but I'm going to cut just the edges with my own circle cutter. And it's ever so small, and I'm going to be attaching that at the end of each eye I've cut. And you're thinking that doesn't look like an eye, but if I turn it around and then shape it, you'll see how it works. Just play with it until you're happy you've achieved the same size and shape for each eye. Once everything is dry, I go ahead and paint them gold. For this I use edible gold dust and Everclear. You can also use lemon extract for this, but make sure that your pieces are dry. I do like to do a couple coats to make sure that it looks completely gold and it has a nice finish. Now remember, when we cut the hearts, we used the smaller heart to create a template. This was for the inner part. Use that as your guide to paint the inner part of the ear gold. I do the same thing for the eyes. Now, when I do apply the eyes to the cake, I'm gonna go one more time with gold to make sure it's all covered. On to coloring the buttercream. I always start with pink, because I can always use pink and then turn it into purple. I like using saran wrap. That way I only have to use one piping tip and one piping bag. Once they're filled, cut one end with scissors. Let's assemble this cake. Now, before I start assembling, I make sure I get it to eye level with the cake to make sure that my eyes are symmetrical. Now let's start piping the buttercream. For this I'm going to be using a 1M Wilton tip, and I'm going to be using the bags we filled earlier. All I'm going to be piping is rosettes. There's really no rhyme and reason where I'm placing the rosettes. I just like to start with 1, 2, 3, and then here and there to make sure they're everywhere. Ooh, that kind of rhyme. I continue with a different color every time, using the same piping bag we did earlier. Now, I make sure that I scatter all the colors evenly, here, there, making sure that there's not too much of one in each place. Although, even if there was, there's really nothing wrong. Here's where you can just be creative and have fun. For this part, I'm using a 125 Ateco tip. And that's just because I decided to go with dollops and different texture here and there, just to accent the cake. And when you're using this tip, all you have to do is apply pressure and then pull up. Once the ears and horns are dried after painting, I apply them to the cake. Now we apply the ears, just making sure that they're straight and symmetrical. I like to go back with some buttercream and fill in any gaps that I might have left. And there you have it. We are done. Here is our unicorn buttercream cake. Please subscribe to our channel, and if you have any questions, leave me a comment. Thank you.